Everyone told us we'd end up together. We spent a decade proving them wrong before admitting they were right. The first time someone said Ethan and I would end up married, I was 14, and he'd just dumped orange soda down my shirt at the 8th grade carnival. His mom laughed and told my mom we were clearly meant to be because we fought like an old married couple. I wanted to die right there next to the ring toss booth. Ethan Chen. Wait, I need to use a different name. Ethan Brooks and I were not going to end up together. We were neighbors who'd been stuck in the same friend group since elementary school because our parents were close. That was it. He was annoying and loud and always trying to one-up me in class. I was convinced he existed solely to make my life harder. By high school, the comments got worse. Every time we argued about something stupid, which movie to see, whose playlist was better, whether pineapple belonged on pizza, someone would smirk and say we had sexual tension. I wanted to scream. There was no tension. Just tension in the traditional sense where I was tense because he was infuriating. Ethan would roll his eyes and change the subject, which at least meant we agreed on one thing. We were never happening. Junior year, he started dating Vanessa Kim from the swim team, and I dated Marcus. No, I need a different name. I dated Owen from debate club. Our friend group did double dates, and it was perfectly fine. Ethan and Vanessa were one of those couples who finished each other's sentences. Owen and I had intense conversations about politics and college plans. It worked. We were all happy. Senior year destroyed everything. Owen got into Yale early decision and started pulling away because long distance wasn't realistic. Vanessa broke up with Ethan after finding texts between him and his lab partner that weren't cheating, but weren't innocent either. Suddenly, Ethan and I were both single at the same time, and our friends acted like it was fate, like the universe had cleared the path for us to finally realize we were soulmates. I started avoiding group hangouts because I couldn't handle the knowing looks anymore. Ethan did the same. We barely spoke the last semester of high school except when forced to at graduation parties. At my family's party, his dad cornered mine and said it was only a matter of time before Ethan and I figured it out. I left my own party early. College was supposed to be my fresh start. I went to Northwestern for journalism. Ethan went to Michigan for engineering. Different states, different lives, different people who didn't know our history and wouldn't make stupid predictions about our future. I threw myself into campus life, joined the school paper, made new friends who had no preconceptions about who I should date. I dated casually. Nothing serious. Just figuring out what I actually wanted without everyone's opinions drowning out my own thoughts. Sophomore year, I met James at a party. He was pre-med, intense, brilliant. We fell into this consuming relationship where we studied together and challenged each other and barely came up for air. My roommate said I seemed different with him, lighter. I thought maybe I'd finally found what everyone had been pushing me toward, just not with the person they'd expected. Thanksgiving break sophomore year, I came home and ran into Ethan at the grocery store. He looked different. Taller somehow, or maybe just more solid. Michigan had been good to him. We made awkward small talk by the produce section until his mom found us and insisted we come to dinner that weekend. Both families, like old times. I couldn't say no without being rude. The dinner was exactly as uncomfortable as I'd feared. His parents asked about my classes, and my mom asked about his engineering program, and everyone danced around the elephant in the room until Ethan's Aunt Rachel asked point blank when we were going to stop being stubborn and date already. I stood up so fast I knocked over my water glass. Said I had a boyfriend, a serious boyfriend, was probably going to spend winter break with his family in Boston. Ethan looked surprised but said nothing. I left before dessert. I did spend winter break in Boston with James's family. His mother was a surgeon and his father was a professor, and they asked me thoughtful questions about my career goals and made me feel like an adult with a future. James and I talked about maybe moving in together junior year, finding an apartment off campus, taking the next step. It felt right. Felt like I was building something real with someone who chose me for me. Not because our parents were friends or because everyone expected it. When I got back to campus, I told my roommate I thought James might be the one. She said I seemed sure, which was all that mattered. But there was something in her tone that made me defensive. I asked what she meant. She said nothing, just that sometimes when I talked about James, I sounded like I was convincing myself. Spring break junior year, James broke up with me. Said he'd been accepted to a summer research program in Geneva and realized our relationship had an expiration date. He was going to medical school somewhere on the East Coast. I was planning to move to New York for journalism. We'd been so focused on the present that we'd ignored the fact our futures were heading in completely different directions. He said he cared about me, but not enough to rearrange his entire life plan. I said I understood. I did understand, but it still felt like getting punched in the stomach. I went home that weekend unannounced and found my mom in the kitchen. She hugged me and didn't ask questions until I was ready. When I finally told her about James, she said the right person wouldn't feel like a compromise. I asked if she meant Ethan. She said she meant anyone who actually fought to keep me. I didn't see Ethan that visit. Didn't want to. Didn't want him or anyone else thinking James breaking up with me meant I was available for whatever everyone had been pushing since 8th grade. I went back to Northwestern and buried myself in work, took on extra assignments at the paper, applied for summer internships in New York, kept myself too busy to think about relationships or futures, or the fact that maybe my roommate had been right about me trying too hard to make James work. Summer before senior year, I got an internship at a digital media company in Brooklyn, shared a tiny apartment with 3 other interns, spent 14-hour days researching stories and learning from editors who actually respected my ideas. I went on dates with guys I met through work or at bars in the village. Nothing stuck. I told myself I was focusing on my career. That was the priority. Senior year started and I was applying to jobs, building my portfolio, trying to figure out where I'd end up after graduation. My top choice was a position at a news startup in Manhattan. Competitive. Ambitious. Exactly what I wanted. I spent months perfecting my application, doing practice interviews, networking with alumni. The day I got the offer call, I was walking across campus and I literally screamed, called my parents immediately. My dad answered and I could hear Ethan's parents in the background. Apparently they were all having dinner together. Everyone congratulated me. Ethan's mom asked where I'd be living. I said I wasn't sure yet, still figuring out roommate situations. She said Ethan had just accepted a job at an engineering firm in Manhattan and needed a roommate for his 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. Before I could process that, my mom was suggesting we should connect, save money, help each other adjust to the city. I said absolutely not, said I'd find my own place. Ethan got on the phone and said he wasn't asking me to be his roommate, just putting it out there as an option since our parents were being insane about it. His voice sounded different on the phone, deeper. Or maybe I'd just forgotten what it sounded like. He said congratulations on the job and hung up before I could respond. My mom said I was being ridiculous, that having a roommate I already knew in a city as expensive as New York was practical. I said I'd rather live in a shoebox alone than deal with everyone making comments about us living together. She said I was letting other people's opinions control my choices, which was exactly what I'd been trying to avoid. She was right, but I wasn't ready to admit it. I found a studio apartment in Brooklyn that cost 70% of my salary. It was basically a closet with a hot plate. My parents looked horrified when they helped me move in. My dad asked why I was being so stubborn. I said I wasn't being stubborn, I was being independent. He said it looked like I was being expensive. The first month was brutal. My paychecks barely covered rent and groceries. I was eating ramen and walking to work to save on subway fare. I made it work because I had to prove I could, that I didn't need anyone's help or suggestions or their friend's kid with a spare room. 3 months in, my landlord raised the rent. Illegally, I found out later, but I didn't know enough to fight it then. I had 2 choices, move or figure out how to make more money. I started freelancing on weekends, writing listicles for clickbait sites that paid pennies per word. I was exhausted and broke and too proud to tell anyone I was struggling. 6 months into my New York life, I ran into Ethan at a coffee shop in Midtown. We were both grabbing coffee before work and nearly collided at the pickup counter. He looked at me and then at my laptop bag covered in freelance company stickers, asked if I was doing okay. I said I was great, thriving actually. He didn't look convinced. He asked if I wanted to grab lunch sometime and catch up. I said sure, expecting him to forget about it. He texted me that afternoon with 3 lunch options for the following week. I picked the cheapest one. We met at a sandwich place near my office and the conversation was surprisingly not awful. He told me about his engineering projects and I told him about stories I was working on. We didn't talk about high school or our parents or any of the history, just current stuff, normal stuff. When the check came, he grabbed it before I could, said he'd expense it. I knew he was lying, but I was too grateful to argue. We started meeting for lunch once a month. It became this weird thing where we kept it secret from our parents because we knew they'd make it into something it wasn't. We were just 2 people from the same hometown trying to survive New York. That was it. Ethan never mentioned his roommate situation, and I never mentioned my financial problems. We kept things surface level, safe. Then one month he showed up to lunch looking stressed. I asked what was wrong. He said his roommate was moving out to live with his girlfriend and Ethan couldn't afford the 2-bedroom alone. He'd been looking for someone to sublease, but everyone who'd looked at the place was either sketchy or couldn't pass the credit check. His lease renewal was in 3 weeks. I could see where this was going, but I didn't say anything. Ethan asked if I knew anyone looking for a room in Queens. I said no. He asked how my studio was working out. I said fine. He looked at me for a long moment and then asked if I was actually fine or if I was just saying that. Something about the way he asked made my defenses crack. I told him about the illegal rent increase, the freelancing, the ramen diet, the fact that I was barely surviving but too stubborn to admit it because everyone had been so sure I'd end up needing help. Ethan didn't say I told you so or make any jokes. He just said his 2nd bedroom was available if I wanted it. Rent would be half what I was paying now. Separate bathrooms. He'd be gone most evenings working late anyway. Purely practical roommate situation. Nothing weird. I thought about it for 3 days. Ran the numbers. Calculated how much money I'd save. How much I could put towards student loans or actually building savings. How much less stressed I'd be. I texted him and said I'd need to see the place first. He sent me the address and I took the subway out to Queens that Saturday. The apartment was in a converted brownstone in Astoria. His room was clearly the master, but the second bedroom was bigger than my entire studio. The kitchen had actual counter space. There was a living room with a couch that didn't pull out into a bed. It was perfect, and I hated that it was perfect. I asked about house rules. He said he didn't care as long as I didn't eat his leftovers or use his fancy headphones. I asked when I could move in. He said whenever. Moving in with Ethan was weird for exactly 2 weeks. Then it wasn't. We fell into this easy routine where I'd make coffee in the morning and he'd cook dinner at night. We'd watch trash TV together and argue about plot holes. Sometimes his engineering friends would come over, and sometimes my journalism friends would visit, and we'd all hang out like normal roommates. The only awkward part was when anyone asked how we knew each other. If we said childhood friends, people would get that look. That knowing look that assumed there was more to the story. So we started saying we grew up in the same town and leaving it at that. My coworkers didn't need to know our parents had been pushing us together since middle school. His friends didn't need to know everyone back home was probably thrilled we were living together, even if it was completely platonic. 4 months into being roommates, my mom called and asked how things were going with Ethan. I said fine. She asked if anything had changed between us. I asked what she meant. She said she meant exactly what she said. I told her we were roommates. That was it. She said she believed me, but she wanted me to know it would be okay if something did change, that nobody would say I told you so. I said there was nothing to tell, so it didn't matter. After we hung up, I sat on the couch feeling defensive about a conversation that hadn't even really happened. Ethan came home from work and found me stress-eating ice cream directly from the container. He asked what was wrong. I said my mom was being annoying. He said his dad had called him that morning with the same weird probing questions. We looked at each other and started laughing. Of course, our parents were coordinating. We made a pact that night. We'd actively date other people, prove to our families and ourselves and everyone else that living together didn't mean anything romantic was happening. It was purely practical, financially smart, adult decision-making, nothing more. I downloaded dating apps and started going on first dates. Ethan did the same. We'd come home and debrief in the kitchen while making late-night snacks. I'd tell him about the guy who spent the whole dinner talking about his ex. He'd tell me about the woman who insisted on splitting every single appetizer down to the exact cent. We'd laugh and agree dating was terrible and we were glad we were just friends. The next weekend, we'd do it again. Different people. Same disappointing results. 3 months of active dating, and neither of us had found anyone worth a third date. I started to wonder if living together was actually sabotaging our love lives. If potential partners could sense something was off about my living situation even when I kept it vague. One night, I came home from a particularly bad date. Guy had spent an hour explaining why all journalists were biased liars, and found Ethan in the living room working on his laptop. I collapsed on the couch next to him and said dating was a scam. He agreed. I asked why we couldn't just find normal people who were interesting and kind and didn't have weird red flags. He said if we could find those people, we wouldn't be sitting here complaining. Then he added that maybe we were being too picky. I asked what he meant. He said maybe we were comparing everyone to some impossible standard that didn't actually exist. That comment bothered me more than it should have. I went to my room and lay in bed thinking about all my failed relationships. Owen, who'd chosen Yale over trying long distance. James, who'd decided I wasn't worth rearranging his life plans for. All the first dates that went nowhere. Was Ethan right? Was I holding everyone to some standard they couldn't meet? And if so, what was that standard? I didn't figure it out that night, or the next week, but the question sat in the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. A month later, I got assigned to cover a music festival in Brooklyn for work. It was a weekend event with multiple stages and dozens of bands. I mentioned it to Ethan while we were making dinner. He said it sounded fun. I said he could come if he wanted. His engineering firm had given him tickets months ago that he'd forgotten about. We could meet up there. The festival was crowded and hot, and the music was incredible. I was supposed to be working, interviewing band members, getting quotes from attendees, but I kept getting distracted by the energy of the crowd. Ethan texted me around noon asking where I was. I sent him my location, and 15 minutes later, he appeared with 2 overpriced beers and this huge grin. We spent the afternoon bouncing between stages, arguing about which bands were overrated and which were underrated. At one point, we were pressed against the barrier for a headlining set, and the crowd surged forward. Ethan put his arm around my shoulders to keep me from getting crushed. It was protective and platonic and completely normal, but something about it felt different. I looked up at him and he was watching the band, but his expression was relaxed in a way I'd never seen before, like he was exactly where he wanted to be. That night, we took the subway back to Queens, and I couldn't stop thinking about his arm around my shoulders, about how natural it had felt, how I hadn't wanted him to move. I told myself I was being ridiculous. We were roommates, friends, nothing more. The next morning, I woke up to him making breakfast, pancakes and bacon and fresh coffee. He said he figured I'd be hungover from the festival. I wasn't hungover, but I didn't correct him. We ate together at the kitchen counter, and I caught myself watching him talk about some engineering problem at work, the way his hands moved when he got excited about something technical, the way he listened when I rambled about the bands from yesterday. It hit me all at once that this was easy. Being with Ethan was easier than any relationship I'd tried to force with anyone else, and that terrified me. I started pulling away after that, staying late at work, making plans with friends on nights Ethan would be home, avoiding the kitchen when I heard him cooking. He noticed after a week and knocked on my bedroom door one night, asked if he'd done something wrong. I said no. He said I was being weird. I said I was just busy with work. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push it. The apartment felt different after that, tense in a way it hadn't been before. I hated that I was the one who'd made it weird, that I'd caught feelings for someone I'd spent 10 years being adamant I didn't want, that everyone who'd ever said we'd end up together might have been seeing something I'd been too stubborn to acknowledge. 2 weeks of avoidance, and Ethan cornered me in the kitchen on a Saturday morning, said we needed to talk. I said I had plans. He said cancel them. Something in his tone made me stop trying to run. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, and he asked me directly what had changed. I said nothing. He said I was a terrible liar. I said maybe I was realizing living together was a mistake. He asked why. I said because people were right about us. Our parents, our friends, everyone who'd ever made comments about us ending up together. Maybe they'd seen something we'd been too busy arguing about to notice. I expected him to laugh or make a joke or tell me I was being ridiculous. Instead, he said he'd been wondering the same thing. We sat there in silence for what felt like an hour, but was probably 2 minutes. Then Ethan said he needed to tell me something, and he didn't want me to freak out. I said I couldn't promise that. He said when he'd offered me the room, it wasn't entirely practical. He'd hoped that spending time together might make me see what he'd apparently been seeing since junior year of high school. That we worked. That fighting against everyone's expectations was exhausting when maybe they'd been right all along. I asked why he'd never said anything before. He said because I'd been so adamant about proving everyone wrong that he figured I'd rather die than admit there might be something there. And he'd rather have me as a roommate and friend than not have me at all. I didn't know what to say. My brain was short-circuiting trying to process 10 years of context in light of this new information. Ethan had liked me since junior year, while I was with Owen, while he was with Vanessa. He'd been playing the long game this entire time. I asked if moving to New York had been partly about me. He said he'd gotten the job offer first, but when he'd found out I'd be here too, it had made the decision easier. I asked about all his dating app disasters. He said they were real. He'd genuinely tried to move on, to find someone else, but nobody felt right because they weren't me. And he'd finally accepted that and figured if I never felt the same way, at least we had this weird friendship thing. I told him I needed time to think. He said take all the time I needed. I went to my room and lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, tried to remember every interaction we'd had since moving in together. The dinners, the TV sessions, his arm around my shoulders at the festival, the way he'd asked if I was actually fine about my studio apartment. All of it recontextualized, all of it suddenly making sense in a way I'd been actively avoiding. I thought about James saying he cared about me but not enough to rearrange his life, about Owen choosing Yale without a second thought, about every person who dated me and then decided I wasn't quite worth the effort. Ethan had rearranged his entire living situation on the off chance I might eventually see what he saw. 3 days passed. I avoided Ethan as much as possible while living in the same apartment, stayed late at work, came home after he was asleep. On the third night, I came home around midnight and found him in the living room watching TV. He saw me and muted it. Asked if we could talk. I said yes. He asked if I'd figured out what I wanted. I said I thought so, but I was scared. He asked what I was scared of. I said everyone being right. Everyone getting to say they'd known all along. Everyone treating us like we'd finally done what we were supposed to do. He said he understood that, but maybe being stubborn about proving everyone wrong wasn't a better reason to make decisions than anything else. I sat down next to him on the couch. Not close enough to touch, but closer than I'd been in days. I said I'd spent 10 years being so focused on not being who everyone expected that I'd ignored what I actually wanted. That somewhere between 8th grade and now, I'd started believing that wanting him meant I was predictable. That I was just following the script everyone had written for us. But maybe the script existed because people who'd known us our whole lives could see something we'd been too close to notice. Ethan said he'd been thinking the same thing. That we'd wasted a lot of time fighting against something that might have been good if we'd given it a chance. I asked what happened if we tried this and it didn't work. If we ruined the friendship and the living situation and everything else we'd built. He said that was a risk with anyone. At least if we tried and failed, we'd know instead of spending the rest of our lives wondering. I said our parents would be insufferable if we got together. He said they'd be worse if we didn't and kept being miserable trying to prove a point. He was right. I knew he was right. I'd known since the festival, maybe longer. I said okay. He asked okay to what? I said okay to trying. To seeing if everyone had been right all along. To stopping fighting against something just because other people saw it first. Ethan kissed me then, soft and careful, like he wasn't sure if I'd change my mind. I kissed him back, and it felt like the festival all over again, like being exactly where I was supposed to be. We spent that night talking about logistics and boundaries and what trying actually meant. Decided we'd keep it quiet for a while, not because we were hiding, but because we needed time to figure out what this was without everyone's commentary. We'd tell our parents eventually, but only after we knew it was real. That conversation lasted until 3 a.m. We fell asleep on the couch together, tangled up in a way that should have been uncomfortable, but wasn't. Dating your roommate was weird. We had to negotiate private space and couple space, and the fact that we couldn't really have date nights that involved coming home to different apartments. We figured it out slowly. Ethan would make dinner, and we'd eat on the couch watching TV, and sometimes that was a date, and sometimes it was just roommates hanging out. I'd come home from work stressed, and he'd listen, and some nights that ended in kissing, and some nights it ended in him bringing me tea and leaving me alone. The lines were blurry, but we learned to communicate instead of assuming. 3 months in, I called my mom and told her Ethan and I were together. She made this noise that was either a sob or a laugh, said she'd known something changed at Thanksgiving when we'd both seemed different. I asked if she was going to say I told you so. She said she'd been waiting 10 years to say it, but now that the moment was here, she just wanted me to be happy. Ethan's parents were similarly emotional when he told them. His dad apparently high-fived Ethan's brother. His mom cried and said she'd always known we were meant for each other. Ethan told me this while we were getting ready for bed, and I felt my stomach twist. I asked if it bothered him that everyone was acting like we'd finally done the inevitable. He said it used to. But now he thought maybe knowing someone your whole life meant they could see the long view better than you could in the moment. Our parents had watched us grow up, had seen us fight and laugh and challenge each other for years. Maybe they'd been right, not because they were forcing something, but because they'd seen us be more ourselves together than apart. 6 months into dating, we had our first major fight. My news startup was downsizing, and I was terrified I'd lose my job. Ethan suggested I apply to his company. They were looking for someone to handle their communications. I said absolutely not. He asked why. I said because I wasn't going to be the girlfriend who followed her boyfriend to his workplace, that I'd built my journalism career and I wasn't giving it up because it was convenient. He said he wasn't asking me to give it up, just to consider a stable option. I said it felt like he was trying to fix me. He said he was trying to help me. I said I didn't need help. I needed him to trust that I could handle my own career. We didn't speak for 2 days. Both of us stubborn and hurt and convinced we were right. My editor called me into her office the following week, said they were restructuring. My position was eliminated. I had 4 weeks severance. I came home and Ethan was in the kitchen making dinner. I told him I'd been laid off. He turned off the stove and hugged me. Didn't say anything about his company or applications or I told you so. Just held me while I cried angry tears about an industry that was collapsing and a job I'd loved and the unfairness of it all. After I calmed down, he said he was sorry for pushing his solution on me, that I'd figure out what was next and he'd support whatever I chose. I said I was sorry for being defensive, that he'd been trying to help and I'd made it into something it wasn't. I spent the next month applying to every journalism job in New York. Got a few interviews, but nothing clicked. My severance was running out. Rent was due. Ethan said he'd cover me for however long I needed. I said absolutely not. He said he was already covering more of the groceries and utilities and it didn't matter. I said it mattered to me. We were partners, but I wasn't going to be dependent on him financially. He asked what I was going to do then. I said I'd figure it out. I started picking up freelance work again. Those terrible listicle sites that paid pennies. Ethan would come home and find me on my laptop at 2 a.m. churning out content I hated. He'd bring me tea and massage my shoulders and not say that this was exactly why he'd suggested his company, but I could feel him thinking it. 8 weeks after my layoff, a former colleague reached out. She'd joined a nonprofit newsroom focused on investigative journalism. They'd just gotten grant funding and were hiring. Was I interested? I interviewed the next day. They offered me the position that weekend. The pay was less than my startup job, but the work was meaningful. Real journalism. Stories that mattered. I said yes immediately. Ethan took me out to celebrate, and I could see the relief on his face. Not because I'd be making money again, but because I'd found something that made me excited instead of desperate. Over dinner, I admitted I'd been scared. That for the first time in my life, I'd felt like I was failing at the thing I was supposed to be good at. He said that's what partnership meant. Being scared together and figuring it out instead of facing it alone. A year into dating, we told our friends back home. Everyone reacted exactly as we'd expected. Lots of finally, and we knew it, and about time. My college roommate said she'd been waiting for this since I'd lived with her in a terrible dorm and talked about Ethan constantly without realizing it. Ethan's Michigan friends said they'd figured something was up when he'd been weirdly picky about dating apps. Everyone had apparently been in on the secret except us. The weird part was, it didn't annoy me anymore. I'd spent so long being defensive about people's expectations that I'd forgotten they came from a place of caring. Our parents had wanted us together because they'd watched us make each other better people. Our friends had pushed us because they'd seen us be happier together than apart. Maybe that wasn't pressure. Maybe that was just love. We'd been together 18 months when Ethan got offered a promotion. His company wanted him to relocate to their San Francisco office, run a new engineering team. It was everything he'd been working toward. The offer came with a significant raise and better title, and all the things that meant his career was taking off. He told me about it over dinner, and I could see him trying to gauge my reaction. I asked if he wanted to take it. He said he didn't know. He'd spent the last decade making decisions based on what other people wanted or expected. He was trying to figure out what he actually wanted for himself. I asked if that included me. He said of course. But he didn't want to be the guy who asked his girlfriend to follow him across the country. Didn't want to be James or Owen or any of the people who'd decided I wasn't worth reshaping their plans for. I told Ethan I needed a week to think. He said take as long as I needed. I called my editor and asked if the nonprofit had any remote positions. She said not really, but she'd check. I called my mom and asked what she thought about San Francisco. She asked if I was moving for Ethan or for myself. I said I didn't know the difference anymore. She said that was probably a good sign. That real partnership meant your individual goals started to overlap until you couldn't tell where one person ended and the other began. I spent that week researching journalism opportunities in San Francisco. The city had a strong media presence, several publications I'd always wanted to write for, a nonprofit investigation network that did exactly the kind of work I cared about. I could make it work. The question was whether I wanted to. A week later, I told Ethan I'd support whatever he decided about the promotion. But if he took it, I was coming with him. Not because I was following him or giving up my career, but because I'd spent 10 years trying to prove I didn't need him, and I was tired of fighting against what I actually wanted. He asked if I was sure. I said I'd never been more sure of anything. We'd both been so scared of becoming people who sacrificed for relationships that we'd forgotten relationships were supposed to involve some sacrifice. The difference was choosing it willingly instead of feeling forced. Ethan took the promotion. I gave notice at my nonprofit job. We started packing up our Queens apartment, sorting through 2 years of accumulated life. The move to San Francisco was chaotic. Our families threw us a going-away party, and everyone made jokes about how we'd fought destiny for a decade before giving in. Ethan's dad said he'd known since we were in middle school. My mom said she'd known since the day Ethan dumped orange soda on me at the carnival. We laughed because what else could we do? They'd all been right. Not because they'd forced something, but because they'd seen us better than we'd seen ourselves. We flew out to San Francisco in March, found an apartment in the Mission with exposed brick and windows that looked toward the bay. Ethan started his new job. I freelanced for a month while applying to local publications. Got hired by the investigative network I'd researched. Everything fell into place in a way that felt almost suspicious, like the universe was rewarding us for finally stopping fighting. 6 months into San Francisco, Ethan proposed. We were hiking in Marin Headlands, and he stopped at this viewpoint overlooking the ocean. Said he'd been carrying the ring for 3 weeks waiting for the perfect moment, but realized there was no perfect moment. Just this. Us. Together. Making decisions that felt right even when they were hard. I said yes before he finished talking. We called our parents from the trailhead and everyone cried. His mom said she'd started planning our wedding in her head when we were 16. My dad said he'd always known we'd get here eventually. They were annoying and presumptuous and completely right. We planned a small wedding in our hometown. Fall ceremony in the park where we'd grown up playing. Limited guest list of family and close friends who'd watched us spend 10 years being stubborn. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. Lay in bed in my childhood room thinking about 8th grade carnival orange soda and high school arguments and college distance and all the ways we'd fought against this. Ethan texted me at 2 a.m. asking if I was awake. I said yes. He said he was thinking about how we'd almost missed this. How we'd been so determined to prove everyone wrong that we'd nearly proven ourselves into permanent unhappiness. I said I was thinking the same thing. He said he'd see me tomorrow. I said I'd be the one in white, making everyone who'd ever predicted this feel very smug. He sent back a heart emoji, and I fell asleep smiling. The wedding was exactly what we'd wanted. Small and intimate with people who'd loved us through all our stubborn years. During the reception, Ethan's Aunt Rachel, the one who'd asked at Thanksgiving sophomore year when we'd stopped being stubborn, gave a speech. She said she'd watched us fight against the inevitable for so long that she'd started to worry we'd miss it entirely. But sometimes the best things in life were the ones everyone else saw before you did. Sometimes being predictable meant you'd found something so right that everyone else could recognize it from the outside. She raised her glass and said, "To Ethan and Julia, who spent a decade proving us wrong before admitting we were right." Everyone laughed and we kissed, and it felt perfect. 2 years into marriage, Ethan and I were hosting Thanksgiving in our San Francisco apartment. His parents and mine crammed around our dining table, telling embarrassing stories about our childhood while we rolled our eyes and held hands under the table, and I caught his eye across the chaos of family and realized this was exactly where we'd been heading. Since the day he dumped orange soda down my shirt, everyone else had just been patient enough to wait for us to figure it out. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.